Welcome to Downshift. My name is Matt, and this is something that we're fairly familiar with here on the channel. Earlier this year, we actually spent time in the outgoing pre-facelift 2023 GLS, and we spent time in the GLS 63. But now, for 2024, we've got a facelift and some big changes. And coincidentally, the biggest competitor to this GLS, the BMW X7, was also pretty extensively updated last year, and we've spent a lot of time with that. So today, thanks to our friends at Mercedes-Benz of Milwaukee, we're hitting the highlights, the best and the rest, to see how it compares to the X7. Now, it seems like every time we do a pro and con video with the Benz, we end up talking about price right away. And that's because the Benz is pretty much always more expensive than the BMW, so long as both vehicles are kind of compared equally and in the same generation. And the story is much the same here, but the gap is actually larger than I was expecting. The Benz is usually a grand or two more than the comparable BMW, but this new facelifted GLS for 2024, this increases by $6,000 over last year's GLS. And that means that this thing now starts at $87,000, which is $5,000 more than the new X7, which has also been updated in the last year or two. And that thing starts at about $82,000 or $83,000. So yeah, about $5,000. So a predictable result, but in an unpredictable way of arriving to it. Now, both the GLS and the X7 are the flagship SUVs from the brands, which means they're the biggest and they have 3 rows as standard. But what does that mean? But as we know, sometimes these 3 rows don't really have super expansive third rows. And that's true with both the GLS and the X7. They're very similar size back here, and it's fairly tight. The GLS has a nice feature where the second row won't crunch a car seat when you get it out of the way, but getting back here isn't the easiest thing ever. You do get cup holders and a little storage cubby back here with a few USB-C chargers, but BMW does technically offer a dedicated sunroof to third row passengers in the X7. So a tight fit and no sunroof up here. It's pretty close between the two, but I will have to give the point to the X7. And for the next point, we're going to talk fuel economy, and this point is a little lukewarm, and that's just because for this year they did make improvements to your fuel economy. It did go up, but it's still not class leading. The 450 gets a massaged version of the 3-liter turbocharged inline-6 with the 48-volt EQ boost system, which improves horsepower but also combined fuel economy. It's up 1 to 21 mpg combined this year, which isn't bad on the face of it. The only problem then is that the BMW X7 is doing that 21 mpg in the city and 25 on the highway. And that's with the X7 making the same 375 horsepower as the new updated 450 engine here. Now, for this year, Mercedes was able to eke out about 13 more horsepower from last year's motor, which will now match, like I said, the X7 at 375 horsepower. So they're on the level now with horsepower, but BMW packs about 30 more pound-feet of torque, which results in the X7 getting to 60 almost a full second quicker than this GLS, at least in real-world testing. Now, this wouldn't be the end of the world on its own, but you remember that the BMW is also more efficient, so you start to scratch your head a little bit. But the GLS isn't objectively slow or inefficient by any means. It's still a great SUV with a great powertrain, so let's talk about some of the other places that it shines. And the first thing that we'll talk about, and I know it's a little bit subjective, but that's the looks. Now, I just think that the GLS looks a little bit better objectively than the X7, and a lot of that has to do with the new facelift components for 2024. The new facelift addresses things like a new grille that's simpler and just better. You've got a new, more aggressive lower fascia, especially for your AMG line. And you've got sleeker headlights that look more expensive. Around the side, you've got bigger wheels. They range from 21 to 23 inches. And around back, you have cleaner taillights. Aside from that, this GLS is largely unchanged for the 2024 facelift, but to me that's okay because it was already probably the best looking 3-row SUV that you could buy. So don't fix what's not broken. Okay, so the BMW X7 will drive a little bit more sophisticated than the GLS, and it'll jump to 60 a little bit quicker. But I'm not buying a 3-row luxury SUV thinking about 0 to 60 times realistically. I'm not really thinking about sport modes. I want it to be easy to drive and I want it to be comfortable. And that's exactly what this GLS is. You get air suspension, so the ride is super supple. It soaks up medium to big bumps super easily. I love the waft and the ease that you get here. The steering is also nice and light and progressive without feeling sloppy at all. The visibility is great, and the power delivery and the transmission and the start-stop is really smooth thanks to the EQ hybrid, mild hybrid system. Everything about this is focused on being smooth versus you can tell the BMW X7 is having a little bit of that conflicting notion of, do I want to be luxury or do I want to be sport? This is full luxury. The cabin is super quiet. It drives smaller than it is, so it's not intimidating to maneuver around parking lots or urban areas. Ultimately, I just really like the feel that I get behind the wheel here. We don't live or drive on a spec sheet, and it's the qualitative stuff that Mercedes has done well here with this GLS. And then there's the interior design, which is largely unchanged from last year, with the main noticeable difference being the steering wheel. But even with a more subtle update in here, I still think this is one of the best cabin spaces for a 3-row SUV. They managed to make it feel fitted without being cramped. In the X7, I do feel cramped for being in such a large SUV. Here the design is clean and expensive looking, while still injecting some ruggedness with things like the center grab handles, which I really love for some reason. And the leather work here is great, the alloys are very nice, and you've got new colors and trims that you can option this year to further personalize your GLS. If there's one thing Benz does well, it's interior and cabin space design. And then the trunk, which is always a bit of a roll of the dice when you get these 3-row SUVs. But I will say here on the GLS, it's pretty good. With the 3rd row up, the GLS offers several cubic feet more space than the X7, and you can really feel that. In fact, you have to put all the seat backs down for the BMW to come back at the GLS in terms of cargo space. But the GLS here has power-controlled seat adjustments to put the seats up and down from the trunk, and you can lower the rear air suspension to get stuff in and out of the trunk easier. And you have a huge cubby underneath your floor to house your spare tire and several other things if you really want. Then the 2nd row here is perfectly fine size-wise. In terms of size, it does feel maybe a touch bigger than the X7, but still pretty close. But it also has some nice luxury touches back here. You get heated seats here as standard, you get power adjustments for your captain's chairs on the doors in classic Mercedes fashion, and you can get cooled seats back here, you can get heated armrests back here, which is super cool. You have different vents here on your center console and your door pillar, and weirdly, you have 2 different size cup holders in your center console. But at the end of the day, it's just nice back here. It's comfy, I've got plenty of space, big pano roof, nice and bright macchiato interior. It's a great place to sit. And what sort of Mercedes-Benz would it be in 2024 without bleeding-edge technology stuff? Your interior design may stay pretty familiar from last year, but one touch in the head unit, and it's very obviously been updated with new graphics, new menus, better 360 cameras, augmented reality navigation options, and now wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is a welcome first for the GLS. I mean, we could go on and on, but to be honest, we've done several reviews of this technology stack, so we're pretty familiar with it. And I guess at the end of the day, the only bummer about the technology is the fact that you don't get the hyperscreen here. But this is a facelift, not a fully new generation, so I might expect the hyperscreen when we get a fully new GLS sometime in the future. So overall, still has pretty much everything I need, and now that we have wireless Apple CarPlay, I really have no complaints. And this next category we're going to talk about is a very Mercedes category. I've labeled it Pizazz and Luxe Touches. And in typical Mercedes fashion, there are a handful of luxy things to make the car feel more special than just about anything else. First is the heated armrests front and back that you can get, which is super nice now that it's starting to get cooler here in Wisconsin. You've got heated and cooled cup holders that you can option, which again, I don't see on an X7 anywhere. Maybe an Alpina, but that's about it. And again, you'll tell me in the comments if I'm wrong. But you also get soft closed doors. This isn't uncommon, but it's just nice to always have. And far and away, my favorite thing on all modern Mercedes-Benz products is the ambient light. You've got the animations, you've got the multi-colors. Far and away, leagues ahead, Mercedes with their ambient light. And the last thing we'll touch on is something completely different, and that's towing. The GLS packs a very healthy 7,716 pound towing capacity for the 450 here. For reference, that's more than the 7,500 pounds you get in the X7, but it's also more than the 7,700 pound max towing you get from the new Chevy Colorado and GMC Canyon. And when your luxury family SUV can tow more than a dedicated body-on-frame pickup truck, you know that you have a little bit of muscle here, which seems like a good time to talk about the final thoughts. So that is the best and the rest of the new 2024 Mercedes-Benz GLS, at least in 450 form. If you do need a little bit more engine, more excitement, there's going to be a 580 with the V8, and of course the full-fat GLS 63 AMG. But as it sits, it's a fantastic full-size luxury SUV. And as it pertains to the X7, they're very close, so make sure you test drive each and decide for yourself. You're honestly not going to pick a bad one either way, but thanks again to our friends at Mercedes-Benz of Milwaukee for letting us have a go in their new GLS 450. We'll see you in the next one.